To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Whisper That Changed Everything. The rain drummed against the windows of Riverside Memorial Chapel as David Reynolds stood before his wife's closed casket, his 6-year-old son Tommy's small hand gripping his own. The funeral parlor was packed with faces he'd known for years, colleagues from his construction company, neighbors, Lisa's co-workers from the hospital where she worked as a nurse. Everyone offered the same hollow condolences, the same pitying looks that made his jaw clench. David had built his empire from nothing. Starting with a single bulldozer and a loan that nearly broke him, Reynolds Construction now employed over 200 people across 3 states. He was known for his iron will, his refusal to back down from any challenge, and his absolute intolerance for betrayal. In business, David Reynolds never forgot a slight, never forgave a double cross. It had made him wealthy and feared in equal measure. But standing here, watching people file past the casket that supposedly held his wife of 8 years, something felt wrong. Lisa's death had been sudden, a car accident on a rainy night. Her body found burned beyond recognition in the wreckage. The police said she'd been driving to her sister's house 2 states away, though David couldn't remember her mentioning any trip. "Daddy," Tommy whispered, tugging at his black suit jacket. "Daddy, I need to tell you something." David knelt down, his calloused hands gentle on his son's shoulders. Tommy had been unusually quiet since the accident, barely speaking to anyone. The grief counselor said it was normal, that children process trauma differently. "What is it, buddy?" Tommy looked around nervously, then leaned close to his father's ear. "Mommy said she had to go hide for a while." David's blood turned to ice. "What did you say?" "Before the accident," Tommy whispered, his blue eyes, so much like Lisa's, wide and serious. "Mommy came to my room that night. She said she had to go hide, and that I should be a good boy for Daddy. She said she'd come back when it was safe." The chapel seemed to spin around David. His hands tightened involuntarily on Tommy's shoulders. "Tommy, are you sure? Maybe you had a dream." "No, Daddy. She was there. She smelled like her perfume." Tommy pointed across the crowded room at a tall man with graying temples standing near the back, someone David had never seen before. The stranger was watching them intently, a slight smile playing at his lips. "And she said that man is going to help her." David's vision narrowed to a tunnel. The stranger was perhaps 50, well-dressed in an expensive suit, with the kind of tan that came from somewhere warmer than their Pennsylvania town. When their eyes met, the man's smile widened, and he raised his hand in what could have been a greeting or a mock salute. David had built his reputation on reading people, on knowing when someone was trying to cheat him. And every instinct he'd honed over 20 years of hard business was screaming that this man was connected to something very, very wrong. "Tommy, I want you to stay right here with Grandma Helen, okay?" David's voice was steel wrapped in velvet as he guided his son to Lisa's mother. "Don't move until I come back." As David began making his way through the crowd, his phone was already in his hand, dialing Detective Ray Morrison. Ray owed him favors. David's company had done work on the detective's house at cost, and more importantly, David had information about certain gambling debts that Ray preferred to keep quiet. "Ray, it's David Reynolds. I need you to run a plate for me right now." David kept his voice low as he pushed through the mourners, his eyes locked on the stranger who was now moving toward the exit. "Pennsylvania tags, 749 Lima Delta Mike." The stranger paused at the door, turning back once more. This time his smile was unmistakable, predatory, mocking. He touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a casual salute before disappearing into the rain. "David? You there?" Ray's voice crackled through the phone. "Yeah, I'm here. What do you have?" "That plate's registered to a Trevor Mallory. Address in Philadelphia." "But David, there's something else. This guy's got a record. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy charges that were dropped 5 years ago. What's this about?" David's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "I'll call you back." He hung up and stood in the doorway of the chapel, rain beginning to soak through his suit. Trevor Mallory. The name meant nothing to him, but the man's face would be burned into his memory forever. Because if Tommy was telling the truth, and David's gut said he was, then Lisa wasn't dead. She had faked her own death, taken the insurance money, and was planning to disappear with a convicted criminal. David pulled out his phone again, this time calling his lawyer. "Bill, it's David. I need you to freeze all of Lisa's accounts immediately. Every credit card, every bank account, the life insurance payout, everything. I don't care what legal gymnastics you have to do. Just do it. David, what's going on? She's not dead, Bill. And I'm going to prove it. As David walked back into the chapel, his mind was already working, calculating, planning. He looked at the faces around him, friends, family, co-workers, and wondered how many of them knew. How many had been part of the lie? His eyes found Tommy, who was standing exactly where he'd left him, looking lost and small next to his grandmother. But David Reynolds wasn't going to let his son grow up believing his mother was dead when she was actually a lying, cheating criminal. And he sure as hell wasn't going to let her get away with it. The old David might have felt hurt, might have questioned what he'd done wrong. But that David had died the moment Trevor Mallory smiled at him. What remained was something colder, harder, a man who had clawed his way up from nothing and would destroy anyone who tried to take what was his. Lisa had made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd betrayed David Reynolds. And David Reynolds never forgot. He never forgave. Chapter 2. The Foundation of Lies. 3 days after the funeral, David sat in his home office, surrounded by financial documents and photographs spread across his massive oak desk. The house felt different now, not empty, but hostile, as if the walls themselves had been lying to him. Tommy was at school, giving David the privacy he needed to dig into his wife's deception. David had met Lisa Hoffman 7 years ago at a charity event for the Children's Hospital. She was working as a pediatric nurse then, beautiful in that wholesome, girl-next-door way that had immediately caught his attention. David had been 35, recently divorced from a wife who'd married him for his money and left when she realized he expected her to earn her keep. Lisa seemed different, hardworking, honest, genuinely caring about others. Their courtship had been whirlwind. Lisa had seemed impressed by his success, but not overwhelmed by it. She worked her shifts at the hospital, volunteered at the shelter, and somehow made David believe he could trust again. When Tommy was born 6 years ago, David thought he finally had the family he'd always wanted. Now, staring at the bank statements his private investigator had provided, David saw the truth. Lisa had been systematically moving money for months before her death. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $1,000 there, transferred to accounts he'd never seen before. The life insurance policy she'd convinced him to increase to $2 million just 6 months ago. The mysterious sister in Ohio who supposedly needed help with medical bills. A sister that didn't exist, according to the background check David had ordered. His phone buzzed. Marcus Webb, his head of security and a former Marine who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before David hired him, had information. "Boss, you're not going to like this," Marcus said without preamble. "I tracked down the car from the accident. The body inside wasn't your wife." David's grip tightened on the phone. "Explain." "The dental records were switched. I've got a contact in the coroner's office. Owes me from when I kept his kid out of jail last year." The woman who died was named Carmen Rodriguez, reported missing from a homeless shelter 3 days before the accident. Similar height and build to Lisa, but the teeth were all wrong until someone made sure the right records ended up in the right file. And Lisa caught a flight to Miami the morning after the accident. Used a fake ID in the name Amanda Torres. She's been planning this for months, maybe longer. David stood and walked to the window overlooking his property, 10 acres of carefully maintained grounds that represented everything he'd built from nothing. His father had been a drunk who died broke and forgotten. His mother had cleaned houses until her back gave out. David had sworn he'd never be that vulnerable, never let anyone have that kind of power over him. What about Trevor Mallory? That's where it gets interesting. Mallory's not just some con artist. He's got connections to some serious people, money laundering operations, fake document networks. But more than that, he's got a history with you. David turned from the window. "What do you mean? Remember the Westbrook project 8 years ago? The one where someone leaked your bids to the competition and cost you the contract." The memory hit David like a physical blow. The Westbrook Mall development, a $50 million project that should have been his. Someone had given his exact bids to Consolidated Construction, allowing them to undercut him by just enough to win. David had lost not just the contract, but 3 of his best foremen who defected to Consolidated for the promise of steady work. "The leak came from inside your organization," Marcus continued. "I never could prove who, but I had my suspicions about someone in your accounting department. A guy named Trevor Morrison. Morrison. David's voice was deadly quiet. Not Mallory. Same guy, different name. He worked for you for 6 months, had access to all your financial records, all your bid preparations. Then he disappeared right after the Westbrook contract was announced. I'm betting he changed his name after that job. David sank into his chair, the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. Trevor hadn't just met Lisa by chance. He'd targeted her, used her, played the long game to get back at David for something. But what? David tried to remember Trevor Morrison, a quiet, unremarkable man in his 40s who'd seemed competent at his job. David had barely noticed when he'd quit. There's more, Marcus said. I found where they're staying. A beach house in Key Largo, registered under another fake name. But they're not hiding very well. Almost like they want to be found. Because they think I'm grieving. They think I bought the whole charade. David's laugh was cold and humorless. How long would it take you to get down there? I could be wheels up in 2 hours. But boss, if this is a trap, then we spring it first. David was already moving, pulling files from his desk, his mind racing through possibilities. But we're not going down there to arrest them. We're going to let them think they've won, let them get comfortable. And then we're going to destroy them so completely that they'll wish they'd never heard the name Reynolds. After Marcus hung up, David sat alone in his office, staring at his wedding photo on the desk. Lisa's smile looked different now, calculating instead of loving. He'd given her everything, trusted her with his son, with his heart. The old David would have been devastated by the betrayal. But the old David was dead, buried right alongside the lie that was Lisa's funeral. David pulled out his phone and called his lawyer again. Bill, I need you to start liquidating some assets. Quietly. I'm going to need about $5 million in cash, untraceable. David, what are you planning? Justice, David said simply. The kind you can't get in a courtroom. As the sun set over his property, David Reynolds began planning his revenge. It would be methodical, thorough, and absolutely merciless. Lisa and Trevor thought they'd stolen from him, humiliated him, made him look like a fool. They had no idea what they'd actually done. They'd awakened something that should have stayed buried. The ruthless, violent man David had been before success had softened him. That man was back now, and he was going to remind them both that David Reynolds never forgot a betrayal. Never. Chapter 3, The Hunter's Preparation. 2 weeks had passed since the funeral, and to the outside world, David Reynolds appeared to be a grieving widower struggling to rebuild his life. He'd returned to work, attended Tommy's soccer games, even went to dinner with well-meaning friends who thought he needed the company. The performance was flawless, a man slowly accepting his loss and moving forward. The reality was far different. In the basement of his home, David had constructed a war room. Maps of Florida covered the walls, marked with red pins showing Lisa and Trevor's movements. Photos taken by Marcus's surveillance team showed the couple living comfortably in their beach house, spending money that should have been Tommy's inheritance. They'd grown careless, confident in their deception. David studied the latest surveillance photos, his expression cold as winter. Lisa looked different. Her blonde hair was now brunette, cut short in a sophisticated style. She'd lost weight, dressed better, carried herself with a confidence that David had never seen in their marriage. Beside her, Trevor Mallory looked every inch the successful businessman he was pretending to be. They thought they'd won. That was their first mistake. Marcus, report, David said without looking up as his security chief entered the basement. They're living under the names Amanda and Richard Torres. Trevor's been making inquiries about purchasing property in Costa Rica, somewhere without extradition treaties. I'd say they're planning to disappear permanently within the next month. Good. That gives us a timeline. David turned to face Marcus, who'd become more than an employee over the years. He was the closest thing David had to a friend. What about local assets? I've got 2 men in place. Former military, completely discreet. They can move on your word. Marcus paused, studying his boss's face. David, I've got to ask, what's the end game here? Because if you're planning what I think you're planning, I'm planning to get my son's inheritance back. I'm planning to make sure these two can never hurt another family the way they've hurt mine. David's voice was calm, but there was something beneath it that made Marcus step back. And I'm planning to send a message that betraying David Reynolds comes with consequences. David walked to another wall where he'd constructed detailed profiles of both targets. Lisa's showed her nursing career, her family history, her known associates. But it was Trevor's profile that held most of his attention. Tell me about Trevor Morrison again. Everything. Marcus consulted his notes. Born Trevor Allen Morrison in Detroit, 47 years old. Father was a small-time criminal. Died in prison when Trevor was 12. Mother remarried twice, both times to men who weren't particularly kind to her son. Trevor was smart, graduated high school early, got a degree in accounting, but always seemed to resent people who had what he didn't. And when he worked for me, you were expanding fast then, hiring anyone with qualifications. Trevor was competent, quiet, but I remember now, he asked a lot of questions about your personal life. Your first marriage, your business practices, your family plans. I thought he was just curious, but looking back, he was studying me, learning my weaknesses. David's jaw clenched. The Westbrook contract was just the beginning. He's been planning this for years. David pulled out a thick folder labeled Phase 1. Inside were detailed financial documents, legal papers, and photographs. Trevor thinks he knows me, thinks he can predict my moves because I'm just another angry husband. He's wrong. Marcus opened the folder, his eyebrows rising as he read. Jesus, David. You're not just going after them. You're going after everything they've ever cared about. Trevor Morrison destroyed my reputation once. Cost me millions, cost me employees I trusted for years. I let it slide because I thought he was just a desperate man making a mistake. David's smile was razor sharp. But this wasn't desperation. This was personal. So now I'm going to show him what personal really means. The plan was elegant in its complexity. David had spent the 2 weeks not just tracking Lisa and Trevor, but researching every aspect of their lives. Trevor's elderly mother in a nursing home whose bills were mysteriously being paid by an offshore account. Lisa's real sister, who did exist, struggling with a gambling addiction that Lisa had been secretly enabling. Trevor's daughter from a previous relationship, a college student who had no idea her father was a criminal. The beauty of it, David explained as he walked Marcus through the plan, is that they'll never see it coming. They think I'm just a grieving husband, maybe suspicious, but ultimately powerless. They don't know that I've been playing chess while they've been playing checkers. Phase 1 would begin with financial pressure, cutting off the money streams they thought were secure, making their stolen funds inaccessible. Phase 2 would be psychological, letting them know they were being hunted without revealing how much David knew. Phase 3 would be the trap, drawing them back to Pennsylvania, where David controlled the environment. What about Tommy? Marcus asked quietly. For the first time, David's expression softened slightly. Tommy stays with my parents until this is over. They think it's because I need time to process my grief. Really, it's because I don't want him anywhere near what's coming. David pulled out one final photograph, a candid shot of Lisa and Trevor laughing on a restaurant patio, champagne glasses raised in a toast. Lisa was wearing a necklace David didn't recognize, expensive and flashy. Trevor had his arm around her, possessive and confident. They're celebrating, David said quietly. Celebrating stealing from my son. Celebrating making me look like a fool. Celebrating destroying everything I built. He set the photo down gently, but his hands were shaking with controlled rage. I'm going to give them something to really celebrate. Marcus had seen David angry before, at competitors who tried to cheat him, at employees who stole from him, at his ex-wife's lawyers during the divorce. But this was different. This was cold, calculated, and absolutely terrifying. When do we start? Marcus asked. Tomorrow. Trevor's mother's nursing home is about to have a financial crisis. Lisa's sister is going to get an interesting visit from some very serious people. And their perfect little beach house is going to become very, very uncomfortable. David turned off the lights in the war room, leaving only the glow from the surveillance monitors. On the screens, Lisa and Trevor were visible through the windows of their stolen paradise, unaware that their world was about to collapse around them. They wanted to play games with David Reynolds, he said softly. They're about to learn that I don't play games. I play for keeps. As they climbed the stairs, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was following a man who'd crossed a line he'd never be able to uncross. But David Reynolds had been his boss for 5 years, had saved his life more than once, and had earned his loyalty in ways that couldn't be bought. Whatever was coming, Marcus would see it through to the end, even if that end was darker than either of them could imagine. Chapter 4. The Net Titans. David stood on the observation deck of a Miami hotel, watching the beach house through high-powered binoculars as the Florida sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red. It had been 3 days since Phase 1 began, and the results were already visible. Trevor paced the deck of their rental house, phone pressed to his ear, his body language radiating frustration and growing panic. The nursing home called this morning, Marcus reported, lowering his own binoculars. Trevor's mother's account was frozen due to irregularities in the funding source. They're demanding immediate payment or she'll be transferred to county care. David's smile was cold. And Lisa's sister? Got a visit from some very convincing debt collectors. Turns out her gambling problem attracted the wrong kind of attention. She's scared enough to cooperate. Gave us everything about Lisa's communications with her over the past 6 months. Through the binoculars, David watched Lisa emerge from the house, her face tight with worry. She was no longer the confident woman from the earlier surveillance photos. The pressure was working. Phase 2. Marcus asked. Tonight. David had learned patience in the construction business. You couldn't rush a foundation, couldn't hurry steel to cure. But once the groundwork was laid, you struck fast and hard. Lisa and Trevor were about to discover that their perfect crime had some very serious flaws. At midnight, David stood in the shadows outside the beach house, while Marcus positioned himself at the back exit. They weren't here to confront, not yet. This was about psychological warfare, about making the targets understand they were being hunted. David pulled out a small device and activated it. Inside the house, every electronic device would simultaneously receive the same message. A photo of Lisa and Trevor at David's funeral, clearly showing their faces in the crowd. No words, no threats, just the image that proved someone knew exactly who they were and what they'd done. The reaction was immediate. David heard shouting from inside the house, saw lights flicking on in rapid succession. Through the window, he could see Trevor grabbing laptops, papers, anything that might be evidence of their deception. Then David did something that would haunt their nightmares. He knocked on the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The house went silent. David waited exactly 60 seconds, then knocked again. Same pattern, same rhythm. He could see shadows moving behind the curtains, could imagine the panic building inside. The third time he knocked, Trevor's voice came through the door, trying to sound calm, but failing badly. Who's there? David said nothing. He simply placed a single red rose, the same type from Lisa's funeral arrangements, on the doorstep and melted back into the darkness. From his hiding spot, David watched Trevor open the door 20 minutes later, his hands shaking as he picked up the rose. Through the window, David could see Lisa pacing, gesticulating wildly as they argued in hushed, desperate tones. They're breaking, Marcus observed through the comm unit. Good. Let them stew for a few days. Fear is more effective than force. The next morning, David sat in a cafe 3 blocks from the beach house, reading a newspaper and watching Trevor through the window. The man looked haggard, constantly checking over his shoulder, jumping at every sound. David had seen the same look on construction workers who'd been caught stealing, the paranoid desperation of someone who knew they were trapped but couldn't see the walls closing in. Trevor's phone rang, and David could see his face go pale as he answered. David smiled, knowing exactly what Trevor was hearing. The voice of his elderly mother, confused and frightened, asking why the nursing home was threatening to move her to a place with bars on the windows. After Trevor hung up, he made 3 more calls. David's contacts in the banking industry would ensure none of them went well. The offshore accounts were frozen pending investigation into suspicious activity. The credit cards were blocked due to security concerns. The cash they thought was safely hidden was no longer accessible. David finished his coffee and walked outside, making sure to pass directly in front of the cafe window where Trevor was sitting. He didn't look in Trevor's direction, didn't acknowledge him in any way, but he knew the man had seen him. David could feel those frightened eyes boring into his back as he walked away. That evening, David received the call he'd been waiting for. Lisa's voice was strained, barely controlled. David? David, is that you? Hello, Lisa. David's voice was calm, almost friendly. How's the weather in Florida? The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Lisa spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. What do you want? I want to talk. Face to face. Just the 3 of us. 3 of us. You, me, and Trevor. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about Tommy's inheritance. Another long pause. David, I can explain. I'm sure you can. Pier 17 in Miami Beach, tomorrow at sunset. Come alone, both of you. No tricks, no games, no running. David's voice hardened. Because if you run, I'll find you. And the next conversation we have won't be nearly as polite. How do I know you won't call the police? David laughed, and the sound made Lisa shiver despite the Florida heat. Lisa, if I wanted to involve the police, you'd already be in custody. I have photos of you alive after your funeral, financial records showing the money transfers, witness testimony placing Trevor at the hospital where he switched the dental records. I have enough evidence to put you both away for 20 years. Then what? Tomorrow. Sunset. Don't disappoint me. David hung up and turned to Marcus, who'd been listening to the conversation. Think they'll show. They don't have a choice. You've got them cornered, and they know it. Marcus paused. But David, they're going to be desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. I'm counting on it, David said softly. Trevor Morrison destroyed my business reputation once and thought he could steal my family. He's about to learn that some debts can only be paid in blood. As night fell over Miami, David made his final preparations. Tomorrow would be the culmination of weeks of planning, years of buried rage, and a lifetime of learning that in this world, only the strong survived. Lisa and Trevor thought they'd beaten him, outsmarted him, taken everything he cared about. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. Chapter 5, The Pier. The sun hung low over Miami Beach as David walked alone down Pier 17, his footsteps echoing on the weathered wooden planks. The pier stretched nearly a quarter-mile into the Atlantic, its far end shrouded in the growing dusk. David had chosen this location carefully, isolated enough for privacy, public enough that Lisa and Trevor might feel safe approaching, and with only one way in or out. Marcus was positioned on a nearby rooftop with a sniper's scope, not to intervene, but to document whatever happened. David needed this conversation recorded, needed evidence of what was about to unfold. At the pier's end, David stopped and checked his watch. 6:15. They were late, which meant they were either not coming or they were planning something. In his experience, cornered animals always chose fight or flight. David. The voice came from behind him. David turned slowly, his hands visible and empty. Lisa stood 30 feet away, her face pale in the dying light. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her lies. Behind her, Trevor Mallory emerged from the shadows, his right hand suspiciously close to his jacket pocket. Lisa. Trevor. David's voice was conversational, almost friendly. Thank you for coming. What do you want? Trevor demanded, stepping protectively in front of Lisa. The gesture might have been noble if David didn't know the man was a career criminal who'd used his wife to steal $2 million. I want the truth. All of it. Starting with why. Lisa's composure cracked. David, you have to understand. I understand that you faked your own death. I understand that you stole Tommy's inheritance. I understand that you've been planning this with a man who once worked for me under a false name. David's voice remained calm, but his eyes were cold as winter steel. What I don't understand is why you thought you could get away with it. Trevor pulled something from his jacket. Not a gun, David noted with interest, but a phone. Because we're smarter than you gave us credit for. Because your arrogance made you sloppy. Sloppy? You think you're the only one who can plan ahead? Trevor's confidence was returning, emboldened by whatever ace he thought he held. You think we didn't know you'd come after us? David waited, letting Trevor talk. In business, he'd learned that if you stayed quiet long enough, people would always tell you more than they intended. The nursing home, the frozen accounts, the psychological games, we expected all of it. Trevor was smiling now, the same predatory expression David had seen at the funeral. What we didn't expect was how easy it would be to turn your own people against you. David felt something cold settle in his chest. Explain. Lisa found her voice again. Marcus has been feeding us information for months, David. Your security chief, your most trusted employee, he's been working for us since before we started planning this. The words hit David like a physical blow. Marcus Webb, the man he'd trusted with his life, with his son's safety, with his most sensitive business dealings. Marcus, who'd helped him plan this very confrontation. That's right, Trevor continued, pulling out his phone and showing David the screen. It displayed a text conversation between Marcus and someone named M. The messages outlined David's plans in detail, including his location right now. Marcus has been insurance, in case you proved more difficult than anticipated. David's mind raced through the implications. Every plan he'd made, every move he'd calculated, Marcus had known about, which meant this entire confrontation was a trap, and he'd walked right into it. The beautiful part, Lisa said, her voice gaining strength as she saw David's shock, is that Marcus isn't here to help you tonight. He's meeting with federal agents right now, turning over evidence that you've been using your construction company to launder money for organized crime. Bank records, forged documents, wire transfers, all with your signature. All fabricated, David said quietly, but very convincing, especially when combined with Marcus's testimony about your increasingly erratic and violent behavior since my death. Lisa's smile was vicious now. By tomorrow morning, you'll be in federal custody, and Trevor and I will be very wealthy refugees in a country that doesn't extradite. David stood silent for a long moment, processing the betrayal, the scope of their planning, the elegant way they'd turned his own trust against him. It was, he had to admit, brilliant. It was also exactly what he'd expected. You know, David said finally, in all my years of business, I've learned one fundamental truth about people. Everyone has a price. The question is whether that price is money, security, revenge, or something else entirely. Trevor frowned. What are you talking about? Marcus Webb, former Marine, 2 tours in Afghanistan, decorated veteran who came home to find his wife had emptied their bank accounts and disappeared with his best friend. David's voice was casual, as if he were discussing the weather. A man whose trust in people was so shattered that he spent 3 years living on the streets before I found him. Lisa and Trevor exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Marcus is absolutely loyal to me, David continued. Not because I pay him well, though I do. Not because I gave him purpose, though I did. He's loyal because I'm the only person in 10 years who hasn't betrayed him. So when you approached him 6 months ago with your scheme, he came straight to me. The color drained from Trevor's face. You're lying. David pulled out his own phone and played a recording. They want me to feed them information about your plans, boss. Should I play along? Marcus's voice was crystal clear. Every conversation you've had with Marcus has been recorded. Every piece of false information he's fed you has been designed to lead you here, to this moment, to this pier where there's no escape and no witnesses except the federal agents waiting on the mainland. Lisa stepped backward, her face white with terror. The federal investigation is real, but it's not targeting me. David's smile was terrifying in its coldness. It's targeting a sophisticated identity theft and insurance fraud ring run by Trevor Morrison, also known as Trevor Mallory, also known by 6 other aliases. Amazing how much evidence federal agents can find when a concerned citizen provides them with detailed financial records, witness testimony, and surveillance footage. Trevor's hand moved toward his jacket again, but David held up a warning finger. I wouldn't. Marcus really is on that rooftop, and his rifle has an effective range of 800 meters. What do you want? Lisa whispered. I want Tommy's inheritance returned. Every penny. I want signed confessions detailing how you faked your death, who helped you, and where the money went. And I want you both to disappear so completely that my son never has to know his mother chose to betray her family rather than love them. And if we refuse? David's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made both of them step back. Then you'll discover that some debts can only be paid one way. And Trevor already owes me for the Westbrook contract 8 years ago. As if summoned by his words, Marcus's voice came through a small speaker David pulled from his pocket. Agents are moving in from the mainland, boss. You've got about 3 minutes. David looked at his watch, then at the 2 people who'd tried to destroy his life. You have 60 seconds to decide. Confessions and restitution, or face the consequences of crossing David Reynolds. The waves lapped against the pier pilings as Lisa and Trevor realized they'd been outplayed from the very beginning. They thought they'd been hunting David, but he'd been hunting them all along. And David Reynolds always got his prey. Chapter 6. The Choice. The pier seemed to shrink around them as David's ultimatum hung in the air. Lisa and Trevor stood frozen, the weight of their situation finally sinking in. The sound of approaching boat engines could be heard in the distance. The federal agents Marcus had mentioned. You planned this whole thing, Trevor said, his voice hollow with defeat. From the beginning. From the moment Tommy told me what you said at the funeral. David's voice was matter of fact. Did you really think I'd become successful by accident? That I'd built a multi-million-dollar company by being naive? Lisa found her voice, desperation making it crack. David, please. I know what we did was wrong, but wrong. David's calm facade cracked for the first time, revealing the fury beneath. You faked your own death, Lisa. You let our 6-year-old son believe his mother was dead. You let him grieve, let him blame himself, let him think he'd never see you again. What you did wasn't wrong, it was evil. We needed the money. For what? For this fantasy life you've been living. David gestured toward the beach house visible in the distance. I gave you everything. A home, financial security, a family. And you threw it away for what? Excitement? The thrill of being criminals. Trevor stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket again. Maybe we should just. Trevor Morrison. The name stopped him cold. Son of Robert Morrison, convicted armed robber. Stepson of Carl Hoffman, who beat you regularly until you were old enough to fight back. Trevor Morrison, who spent his entire life resenting people who had what he didn't. David began walking slowly toward them, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You targeted my company 8 years ago because you knew I was successful, knew I had something you wanted. When that wasn't enough, you spent years planning this, studying my marriage, learning my weaknesses, turning my wife against me. She was already unhappy. Trevor snarled. You think your money and your big house made up for the fact that you treated her like an employee instead of a wife. The words hit their mark, David's jaw clenching visibly. Maybe I wasn't the perfect husband, but I never lied to her. I never betrayed her. And I sure as hell never used her to steal from our son. Lisa was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. David, what if we give it all back? What if we confess, make it right? Make it right. David's laugh was bitter. How do you make it right for Tommy? How do you explain to a 6-year-old that his mother isn't dead? She just decided she didn't want to be his mother anymore. The boat engines were getting closer. David pulled out his phone and showed them a text message. Federal agents will be here in 90 seconds. You have a choice to make. Trevor pulled something from his jacket, not a gun, but a knife. Maybe we should make our own choice. David didn't move, didn't even blink. You're going to knife me? On a pier with federal agents approaching and a sniper watching? How exactly does that solve your problems? Maybe it doesn't solve them, Trevor said, the knife trembling in his hand. But it sure as hell makes me feel better. Trevor, don't. Lisa started, but he cut her off. No, I'm tired of being the victim here. Tired of him acting like he's some kind of avenging angel. Trevor's voice was rising, panic overriding reason. He destroyed my life once, cost me everything I worked for. I'm not letting him do it again. You destroyed your own life, David said quietly. I just refuse to let you take mine with it. Trevor lunged forward with the knife, but David was ready. Years of construction work had kept him strong, and years of dealing with violent competitors had taught him how to fight. He sidestepped the clumsy attack, grabbed Trevor's wrist, and twisted until the knife clattered onto the pier. Federal agents. Everyone freeze. The voice came from behind them as a Coast Guard vessel pulled up to the pier, armed agents already visible on deck. David stepped back from Trevor, his hands raised and visible. David Reynolds, he called out. I'm the one who called this in. Agent Sarah Chun climbed onto the pier, her weapon drawn but lowered. Mr. Reynolds, step away from the suspects. As David moved away, Trevor made one last desperate choice. Instead of surrendering, instead of accepting defeat, he grabbed Lisa's hand and ran toward the far end of the pier. Trevor, no. Lisa screamed, but he was beyond reason now. David watched in cold satisfaction as Trevor realized there was nowhere to go. The pier ended in open water, with no boat waiting, no escape route, no way out except surrender or suicide. Trevor stood at the pier's edge, pulling Lisa against him as a human shield. Stay back. I'll jump. I'll take her with me. Trevor, please, Lisa sobbed. It's over. Just give up. It's not over until I say it's over. Agent Chun had her weapon trained on Trevor, but with Lisa in his arms, she couldn't risk a shot. Sir, let the woman go. There's nowhere to run. There's always somewhere to run, Trevor snarled. But his bravado was cracking, desperation showing through. David stepped forward, ignoring Agent Chin's orders to stay back. Trevor, look at me. Trevor's wild eyes fixed on David's face. You've lost. It's over. But you still have one choice left. Do you want to be remembered as a coward who took an innocent woman down with him? Or do you want to face the consequences of your actions like a man? Innocent. Trevor laughed hysterically. She's as guilty as I am. Maybe. But she's also the mother of my son. And despite everything she's done, Tommy doesn't deserve to lose her twice. For a moment, Trevor wavered. David could see the internal struggle, the last remnants of whatever humanity the man had left warring with his desperation and rage. Then Trevor made his final choice. He released Lisa, shoving her toward the agents, and dove backward off the pier into the dark water below. David rushed to the edge, looking down into the churning waves. Trevor Morrison had vanished beneath the surface, and despite the Coast Guard's immediate search efforts, he never came back up. Some debts, David thought grimly, could only be paid one way. Chapter 7. Consequences and Confessions. 3 days later, David sat across from Lisa in a federal holding facility, separated by reinforced glass and connected by a phone that recorded every word. She looked haggard, broken, nothing like the confident woman who'd started this nightmare. Her orange jumpsuit was a stark contrast to the designer clothes she'd worn in Florida. They found his body this morning, David said without preamble, washed up near Key Biscayne. Lisa closed her eyes, fresh tears streaming down her face. He wasn't supposed to die, David. None of this was supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen, Lisa? You fake your death, take the insurance money, and live happily ever after while our son grows up thinking his mother is dead. We were going to send for Tommy once we were settled. Once it was safe. David's laugh was cold and humorless. Send for him? Like a package? You were going to kidnap our son and make him live with criminals in exile. I would never hurt Tommy. You already did hurt him. David's calm facade cracked, revealing the rage beneath. You let him believe you were dead, Lisa. You let him think he'd lost his mother forever. Do you have any idea what that did to him? Lisa sobbed openly now, the weight of her choices finally crashing down on her. I thought it would be easier for him. A clean break. Easier? Or just easier for you? The silence stretched between them, filled only by Lisa's quiet crying. Finally, David leaned forward, his voice deadly serious. The federal prosecutor is offering you a deal. 20 years, eligible for parole in 12 if you cooperate fully. Given what you've done, insurance fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, child abandonment, it's more generous than you deserve. Lisa looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. What do I have to do? Full confession. Every detail of how you planned this, who helped you, where the money went. You'll return every penny you can account for, and you'll sign papers terminating your parental rights. My parental rights? Lisa's voice was a whisper. You made your choice when you decided to fake your death. Tommy needs stability, needs to know that the people in his life won't abandon him. David's voice was implacable. You'll be out of prison when he's 18. If he wants a relationship with you then, that'll be his choice. But until then, you're legally dead to him. David, please. Those are the terms. Take them or face life in prison. Lisa's hands shook as she held the phone. What about Tommy? What will you tell him? The truth. That his mother made some very bad choices and has to face the consequences. That sometimes people we love disappoint us, but that doesn't mean we're bad or that we did something wrong. Will you tell him that I loved him? For the first time, David's expression softened slightly. I'll tell him that his mother was sick, that she made mistakes, but that she did love him. And I'll make sure he knows that what happened wasn't his fault. Lisa nodded through her tears. I want to take the deal. 2 hours later, David walked out of the federal building into the Miami sunshine. Marcus was waiting by the car, his face grim. How'd it go? She's going to cooperate. Full confession, financial restitution, termination of parental rights. David got into the passenger seat, suddenly feeling exhausted. It's over. Marcus started the engine, but didn't put the car in drive. Boss, I've got to ask, was it worth it? All of this. David was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the busy Miami street. Trevor Morrison cost me the Westbrook contract 8 years ago. That was business. I could live with it. But when he came after my family, when he used my wife to steal from my son, David's voice trailed off. Some lines can't be uncrossed, Marcus said softly. No, they can't. And I don't regret crossing them. They drove in silence toward the airport, where David's private jet waited to take them back to Pennsylvania. David's phone buzzed with a text from his parents. Tommy asked when you're coming home. We told him soon. Home. David realized he wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The house he'd shared with Lisa, the life they'd built together, all of it was tainted now by her betrayal. But Tommy was there, and Tommy was all that mattered. Marcus, when we get back, I want you to start looking for a new house. Something fresh, somewhere Tommy can start over without ghosts. Any particular area? Somewhere with good schools, safe neighborhoods. Somewhere a 6-year-old can be happy. As the plane took off from Miami, David thought about the conversation he'd have to have with Tommy. How do you explain to a child that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the worst? How do you teach them to love again after betrayal? David Reynolds had built an empire from nothing, had overcome every obstacle life had thrown at him. But sitting in his private jet, flying home to face his son's questions, he wasn't a successful businessman or a ruthless enemy. He was just a father trying to pick up the pieces of a shattered family. The hardest battle was yet to come. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. 6 months later, David stood in the kitchen of their new house, a sprawling ranch-style home in the suburbs, far from the memories that haunted their old place. Through the window, he could see Tommy playing in the backyard with Rex, the German Shepherd puppy they'd gotten last month. The boy was laughing, the sound carrying through the glass like music. It had taken time, therapy, and countless difficult conversations, but Tommy was healing. David had told him an age-appropriate version of the truth, that his mother had been very sick, had made bad choices, and was now in a place where she could get help. Tommy had cried, had been angry, had asked questions that broke David's heart. But children were resilient, and with help, Tommy was learning to trust again. The doorbell rang, interrupting David's thoughts. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression serious. Boss, we've got visitors. Federal agents. David frowned. The case against Lisa was closed, her confession complete, and her sentencing scheduled for next week. What do they want? They wouldn't say. Just that it's about the Morrison case. David found Agent Chun and her partner waiting in his living room, their faces grave. Agent Chun, I thought we'd covered everything already. Mr. Reynolds, we're here about something that's come to light during our investigation into Trevor Morrison's background. She pulled out a file, spreading photos across his coffee table. These are surveillance photos from various locations where Morrison operated over the past 5 years. David studied the images, recognizing Trevor's face in each one. What am I looking at? Trevor Morrison wasn't just a con artist, Mr. Reynolds. He was part of a larger network, people who specialized in identity theft, insurance fraud, and what they called family dissolution. David's blood ran cold. Explain. Agent Chin's partner, Agent Brooks, leaned forward. They target successful families, study their dynamics, find weaknesses they can exploit. Then they systematically destroy those families from within, usually by turning family members against each other or manipulating them into criminal activity. You're saying Lisa wasn't the only one? She was the 7th wife Morrison had manipulated into faking her death for insurance money. The other 6 families were all wealthy, all had children, all fit the same profile. Agent Chin's voice was grim. None of those women survived to see trial. David felt the room spin around him. What do you mean? Morrison had a pattern. Once the insurance money was collected, once the families were destroyed, the women would disappear, usually staged as suicides or accidents. He'd keep the money and move on to the next target. The implication hit David like a physical blow. Lisa was supposed to die once Morrison felt secure with the money. We found evidence in his personal effects, detailed plans for staging her suicide in Costa Rica. She never would have made it to that new life he promised her. David sank into his chair, the weight of what he was hearing settling over him. She was a victim too. A victim who became an accomplice, yes. But Morrison was the predator here. He studied your family for months before making contact with your wife. He knew exactly what buttons to push, exactly how to make her believe that running away was her only option. Agent Brooks pulled out another file. There's more. We've traced Morrison's network back nearly a decade. He wasn't working alone. There were at least 3 other men operating similar schemes across the country. We've identified 17 families that were targeted, 12 wives who were manipulated into crimes, and 8 children who lost their mothers to Morrison's operation. Jesus Christ. The good news is that your actions, forcing Morrison into the open, getting him to reveal his methods. It's allowed us to shut down the entire network. We've made 6 arrests in the past month, and we've been able to reunite 3 children with mothers they thought were dead. David's mind reeled with the implications. Tommy could have lost both parents. David to prison for revenge he thought was justified, and Lisa to Morrison's ultimate betrayal. The realization that he'd been played as much as Lisa was a bitter pill to swallow. "There's something else," Agent Chen said quietly. "We've been authorized to offer Lisa a modified plea deal. Given what we now know about Morrison's psychological manipulation, about his history of exploiting vulnerable women, the prosecutor is willing to reduce her sentence significantly." How significantly? 5 years, eligible for parole in 3. With credit for time served in good behavior, she could be out in 18 months. David was quiet for a long time, processing everything. The woman he'd hated for 6 months, the betrayer he'd wanted to destroy, had been as much a victim as he was. Morrison had played them all, turned their love for each other into weapons he could use to tear their family apart. What would that mean for Tommy's custody situation? That would be up to you and the family court. The termination of parental rights could be reversed if both parents agree and if it's deemed in the child's best interest. After the agents left, David stood alone in his living room, staring at the photos spread across his coffee table. Trevor Morrison's face looked back at him from a dozen different surveillance shots. A predator who'd made a career of destroying families. Marcus found him there an hour later. "Boss, you okay?" "I was wrong, Marcus. About Lisa, about everything. You couldn't have known. I should have seen it. Should have realized that Lisa wasn't smart enough or cruel enough to plan something like this alone." David's voice was hollow. "I was so focused on getting revenge that I never stopped to ask who was really responsible. What are you going to do?" David looked out the window at Tommy, who was still playing with the dog, still laughing despite everything he'd been through. "I'm going to talk to my son, and then I'm going to visit his mother." "You think that's wise?" "I think," David said slowly, "that Tommy deserves the chance to have his family back. What's left of it." That evening, David sat Tommy down for the hardest conversation of his life. He explained, in words a 6-year-old could understand, that sometimes bad people trick good people into doing bad things. That Mommy had been tricked, that she was sorry, and that maybe, just maybe, she could come home someday. Tommy listened with the serious expression children got when they knew adults were telling them something important. When David finished, Tommy was quiet for a long moment. "Daddy, if Mommy comes home, will you still be mad at her?" David knelt down to his son's level, looking into those innocent blue eyes. "I might be sad for a while, buddy, and disappointed, but mad? No, I don't think I'll be mad anymore." "Good," Tommy said simply, "because being mad all the time looks really tired." Out of the mouths of babes, David thought. His 6-year-old had just taught him something about forgiveness that he'd been too proud to learn on his own. Some betrayals, he realized, weren't betrayals at all. They were just people making the wrong choices for what they thought were the right reasons. And maybe, just maybe, those people deserved a second chance. Chapter 9, Second Chances. 2 years later, David stood in the visiting room of the minimum security federal facility where Lisa was serving the remainder of her sentence. She looked different, older, more mature, but also somehow more herself than she'd been in years. The haunted desperation was gone, replaced by something that looked like peace. "You look good," David said, settling into the plastic chair across from her. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Tommy wanted me to give you this." David handed her a drawing, stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, and me standing in front of a house with a rainbow overhead. "He's been working on it for weeks." Lisa's eyes filled with tears as she studied their son's artwork. "How is he?" "Good. Really good. He's on a soccer team now, made some friends in the neighborhood. He asks about you every week." "What do you tell him?" "The truth, age-appropriate version. That you made mistakes, but you're working to fix them. That you love him and miss him. That maybe someday you can be a family again, but it's complicated." Lisa set the drawing down carefully, as if it were made of glass. "David, I need you to know, I remember everything Morrison said to me, every argument he made, every way he twisted my thinking. But I also remember making my own choices. I can't blame everything on him. The experts are trying to be kind. But the truth is, I was unhappy in our marriage. Not because you were a bad husband, but because I didn't know who I was as a person. I felt like I was just playing a role, the wife, the mother, the good woman, without really understanding what I wanted from life. David leaned back in his chair. We were both playing roles, I think. I was so focused on being successful, on providing for the family, that I forgot to actually connect with the family I was providing for. Morrison spotted that weakness and exploited it. He made me believe that running away was better than trying to fix things. Lisa's voice was steady now, the voice of someone who'd spent 2 years in therapy understanding her own motivations. But I should have talked to you instead of listening to a criminal. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the past settling between them. Finally, David spoke again. The parole board meets next month. I know. My lawyer says I have a good chance of early release. Lisa, I've been thinking about what comes next. For Tommy's sake, for all our sakes. Lisa looked up, hope and fear warring in her expression. I don't think we can go back to what we were, David said carefully. Too much has happened, too much has changed. But maybe we can figure out how to be something new. Co-parents, friends, a family that doesn't look like what we had before, but still works for Tommy. You'd be willing to try that? After everything, David thought about the past 2 years, the therapy sessions, the conversations with Tommy, the gradual understanding that some betrayals were more complicated than they first appeared. Tommy needs his mother. And maybe I need to learn how to forgive. David, I don't expect. I'm not doing this for you. David interrupted, but not unkindly. I'm doing it for him. And maybe for myself too. Carrying that anger for 2 years nearly destroyed me. I became someone I didn't recognize, cold, calculating, obsessed with revenge. You had every right to be angry. Maybe. But anger doesn't build anything, Lisa. It just tears things down. I'm good at building things. I want to get back to that. Lisa nodded, tears streaming down her face. If I get out early, where would I live? I can't go back to our old house. We sold it. Too many ghosts. David pulled out a folder. I bought a small house about 10 minutes from our new place. It needs work, but I thought maybe you'd like to fix it up yourself. Give you something to do, something that's yours. Lisa stared at the photos of the modest ranch house, her hands shaking. You bought me a house? I bought Tommy's mother a house. There's a difference. David, I can't afford. It's paid for. Consider it part of the insurance money you're returning. David's smile was small but genuine. Besides, I need you close enough for custody arrangements, but far enough away that we're not stepping on each other. They talked for another hour about practical things, custody schedules, therapy for Tommy to prepare him for his mother's return, the conditions of Lisa's parole. But underneath the logistics was something neither of them had expected, the possibility of healing. As visiting hours ended, Lisa stood to leave. David, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think you'll ever be able to trust me again? David was quiet for a long moment, considering. I don't know. Trust isn't something you decide to do. It's something that builds over time, through actions, through consistency. But I'm willing to give you the chance to earn it back. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but it's what Tommy deserves. And maybe it's what we all need to move forward. 6 months later, David stood in the driveway of Lisa's new house, watching through the window as she helped Tommy with his homework at the kitchen table. The sight still felt strange, surreal after everything they'd been through, but it was getting easier. Their arrangement wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, difficult conversations, times when the past threatened to overwhelm the present. But Tommy was thriving with both parents back in his life, and that made everything else worthwhile. David's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. New project starting Monday. You ready to get back to building things instead of tearing them down? David smiled as he typed back. More than ready. As he drove home to his own house, their son alternated weeks between both parents. David reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He'd started as a man obsessed with revenge, determined to destroy anyone who betrayed him. He was ending as a father focused on building something better from the ruins of what had been lost. Trevor Morrison was dead, his network dismantled, his victims finally free to heal. Lisa was rebuilding her life one day at a time, earning back the trust she'd lost through small acts of consistency and care. Tommy was happy, secure in the knowledge that both his parents loved him even if they couldn't love each other the way they once had. And David? David Reynolds was still a man who didn't forget betrayals, who didn't tolerate being played for a fool. But he'd learned something important over the past 3 years. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's learning how to forgive them. As he pulled into his driveway, David saw the light on in Tommy's room. The boy was back with him next week. There would be soccer practice, homework help, bedtime stories, and all the ordinary moments that made a family. It wasn't the family he'd planned for, wasn't the life he'd expected, but it was theirs, built from the ashes of betrayal and the difficult choice to heal rather than destroy. And for David Reynolds, that was enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.